Welcome back, everybody, to Talk of the Now podcast. And I'm Gene back with you. And today I've got a new person on that I haven't had on before. His name is Mr. Keith. Keith, how are you?
Fantastic, Gene. How about you, man?
Doing pretty good, pretty good. The reason I had Keith on was because Keith's an old friend, and I just like to have old friends on and people that I think can do well. Um, I have some friends, Keith, that are, how shall we say, camera shy, microphone shy. And if you even mention going on a camera or being on
Shut down.
microphone, yeah, they just shut down. They're just like, no, I will not. You will not have my voice recorded into the ether of the internet.
That's right. As if it's not already.
Yeah. Well, I have a brother, and he is not an internet person. He's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
off. If anybody's off the grid, it's my brother. He doesn't. I don't think he has a credit card. I think he has a bank account. He does not have an email address. He does not have any social media presence whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so if anybody's off the grid, it might just be my brother. But
Yeah. Listen, there are people that affirmatively make that choice, and
uh,
I tip my hat to them. I'm off. I admire them. That's for sure.
yeah, I think his is somewhat. His might be sort of a kind of a I just don't care about it type thing.
Yeah.
Like I know there's people that do sort of a internet fast kind of there. I'm not going to do any
Yeah.
of that stuff for a whole year. But
Yeah.
anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about you. So Keith, you're from Atlanta area, just like Jason and I. For those that don't know, I know Keith through Jason, the guy that co-hosted with me a lot. Tell me how you know Jason.
Yeah, well, you and I kind of started hanging out because, gosh, would that have been, golly, like late 90s, early 2000, like 2001, 2002?
Yeah.
Um, because we were all, most of us were either graduating college or trying to, one of the two. And,
Uh-huh.
and so, and a bunch of us had moved back home and, you know, uh, starting to get those first jobs and hanging out. I mean, we had to, we weren't married, didn't have kids, and we're like, let's hang out. So we did a lot of that, and yeah, through
Yeah.
Jason. I mean, because heavens, Jason knows everybody. I mean, I think I know a lot of
Yeah.
people, and then then talk to Jason. But
Jason's the
yeah,
ultimate networker.
yeah. I mean, right? So, uh, man, our crew, and we hung out pretty doggone consistently. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, if you asked us where the good places were to eat around like Lilburn, Snellville, uh,
Lawrenceville.
yeah, Lawrence, yeah, we could have named them back then, boy, because
Yeah.
we were all the time. I say that we're the good, inexpensive places to eat. Were
Now, okay, were you a DeKalb County person like Jason? You grew up in the DeKalb?
sure did.
I
So
thought
I
you did.
grew up over off Memorial Drive and Rockbridge Road, so right there, close to 285,
Oh
and
yeah.
I went to Clarkston High School. All good elementary. I was cab through and through. Both my parents grew up. Well, my mom, yeah, they were both DeKalb County kids. I mean, my mom was born up in North Georgia,
Hmm.
but basically raised in Tucker. My dad was raised in. He went to Avondale, but he was a Scottdale boy. Which, if anybody knows that area, he was from the Mill Village. So
I was
he
about to
was,
say, tell us about the Scottdale community. Because Jason, I don't think he would mind me telling people that his dad grew up in that community as well, right?
yeah, and honestly, that's how Jason and a number of the guys that you met through Jason and I. That's how we're connected.
Hmm.
So like our grandparents, for the most part, and some of us even further back than that, um, families settled in the Scottdale area because of the Scott family. So the Scott family owned the Scottdale Mill,
Oh, I did not know this.
which yeah, which was that was their name, the Scott family. Um, related actually, that family is either related or one of their relatives is where Agnes Scott College comes from. Um, goes way
Interesting.
back. So, yeah. So they had the mill village there, or the mill, the cotton mill. So they um, raw cotton was brought in on the railroad, brought into the mill, and they'd spin it, weave it,
Wow.
and then send it out as cloth. It was, I think I remember my dad telling me it wasn't the most refined cloth. And then just over, not even a mile away, was another mill called the what was that one? It was the duck mill. It was the duck and cordage mill, and I can't remember who owned that one. But so you had a pretty substantial little milling area, if you will,
Yeah.
right there between the Scottdale mill and the other one over. It's actually behind where the MARTA buses are on Laredo Drive, crossing the Dekalb Farmers Market, kind of over in that area. So it's like within spitting distance of each other. So you had a lot of mill people, a lot of mill workers. The mill, so the Scotts owned the mill. They owned the village next to the mill. So all the workers lived in the village, and the village was owned by the mill.
A la
Um,
Hershey type deal.
yeah, exactly. So like,
Mhm.
like the old Tennessee Ernie Ford song, like 16 tons, right? That, well, I almost sold to the company store. I mean, that they had the company store there right
Hmm.
on East Ponce. The building's gone. I actually have a brick from the building in my garage. Um, so that they had a company store,
Hmm.
had company credit and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this. You couldn't buy anything. It was like a communist type system, right?
It very much was. Yeah, just about like a commune,
Hmm.
um, where you had
You had
a
to buy
very
it from their stores.
yeah. So, and
Yeah.
it's not that you couldn't buy from other places, um, but they just made it awfully convenient so
Ah.
that oh well, if you buy it from us, we'll just take it out of your paycheck. Oh
Mm.
well, if that's all it is, no problem. I mean, there's a definite convenience to it, but I don't know how competitive the prices were. So
Right. There
um,
was probably a little bit of lining of pockets throughout the country because of such
yeah, oh
practices.
yeah, sure. So they were there, and my grandfather, so that was how my grandparents met, was in the Mill Village.
Hmm.
And ultimately it was because of the church. The church that I grew up in was founded there across the railroad tracks from the Mill Village in 1900, and
Wow.
my great grandfather was one of the founding elders of the church. Um, so there was a lot of, back then, a lot of us now go to churches that are miles away from our home. And back then, churches were way more community based. You had a lot more churches, especially here in the South. You had a lot more churches because they were neighborhood or community based.
Have a
Um,
parish system.
yeah, exactly, very much so. And honestly, the school system kind of went that direction too. So when DeKalb County schools started becoming a thing, which was when my dad was coming up and your parents were coming up, when the boomers, there's a reason they call them the boomers, because everything boomed. The education system boomed. And
Mhm.
so DeKalb County schools, they built their schools based on communities. And so if you were to go find a lot of the old elementary schools in DeKalb County, some of them are literally in the middle of a neighborhood. Um, and so
Hmm.
they were smaller, and there was more of them because they were community based, just like the churches were. Whereas then you move out to Gwinnett County based it more on, we're going to build bigger schools and draw from a greater area around the school.
Hmm.
So you want to talk about a difference in like a generational move in education. You look at DeKalb County and Gwinnett County in terms of how they built their schools. Of course, part of that for Gwinnett County is when they started, they were very rural too. So
Oh yeah.
um, they
Yeah.
had to draw in from further away. But anyway, sorry, all that
What
aside.
I was going to ask you, are there any remnants of that village left?
Yeah. So, matter of fact, I literally just drove by my grandparents' house Friday. Gotta love Atlanta traffic. We were headed down south of Atlanta. 285 was terrible, so I took some back roads to get around, and I ended up taking. I had a couple of my cousins with me, so we went by We just took a detour and went by their old house. So yeah, the whole village is still there.
Hmm.
Um, at least if you're looking at the mill from East Ponce, or as we say it here, Ponce de Leon instead of Ponce de Leon. So
Uh-huh.
if you look at the mill village to the left of the mill, all that part of the village is still there. All the homes are there, and some really neat things have happened with like younger people coming in and redoing the homes. Matter of fact, the lady that bought
Hmm.
my grandparents' house, she completely redid it, and she always said we had an open invitation anytime we wanted to come back and see it, and she did a beautiful job with it.
Hmm.
Uh, but back when they were first built, a lot of those, well, the smaller houses were definitely single family, but some of the bigger houses were duplexes. So when my dad first, the house that I remember going to, that house was originally two families, and it was my dad and his family, his two siblings, and mom and dad on one side of the house, and then there were, can't remember, it was another smaller family on the other side, with literally like a door in the wall between, right, between
Wow.
the two sides of the house. And the house was one, two, three rooms,
Hmm.
just three big rectangles, and didn't have indoor plumbing until I think my dad was in high school, I think, when
Hmm.
they got, so that was the 60s.
Wow.
They get indoor
Wow.
plumbing.
My dad and his family, grandfather, they were like, um I don't know what the times were like because they did a lot of moving. They weren't part of some village like your grandparents. So to contrast what you're telling me is interesting because I know that my dad said that they were in the DeKalb area, but they were like move house to house for like a period of 10 years. It was just, moving around to different neighborhoods type thing.
Yeah.
It's a
And
very interesting.
who knows, at that time it could have had to do with just following work, because
Hmm.
it's not like everybody had cars
Yeah.
or could afford them. Sure.
But as far as I can tell, my family dad's side have been in the Atlanta area going back to the 1800s. So
Oh,
who knows
easily.
from
Right.
where that came from? But I think that that's cool though. That the Scott is it Scottdale or yeah Scottdale, right?
Yeah, yeah, that you said it correctly, and that's another thing a lot of people get wrong is, a lot of people think Scottsdale like Arizona, but yeah, it's
Uh
Scottsdale, so there's no
Scottdale.
S in there. Yep.
But that I think that's I don't know. I think that there were a lot of communities like that post, or I'm sorry, not post industrial revolution, but during the industrial revolution, after the cotton mill became a thing, like Greenville, places like yeah, all over Alabama. I imagine they had a lot of those
Oh,
kind of villages.
yeah, they sure were. And so my dad's dad, a lot of them came up to, how he got to Scottsdale was from Griffin. So a lot of his family was down in Griffin, again,
Mm.
working in mills down in Griffin. Um, so if people don't know, Griffin is south of Atlanta, uh, kind of headed down 75 toward Macon, uh,
Hmm.
just about halfway to Macon, actually, from Atlanta. Um, so yeah, that's where, and actually that's where a lot of his relatives still are. Like some of our distant cousins and things are still in the Griffin area today.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
I want to read
so,
more about the post Civil War Reconstruction South because to me it's a fascinating thing how they went from dirt bottom, poor, rural, and how the Industrial Revolution slowly trickled into the South, especially when it came to mills and
yeah.
things like that. One of my seventh grade, this is off tangent, but one of my seventh grade I guess you call it book reports that I did was on Shoeless Joe Jackson of the Chicago Black Sox. Yeah,
Yep.
I'm sure you know his story, but he was banned from baseball with I think it was 19 8. Well, I forget. I mean, eight other players and 8 Men Out. Good movie to watch.
Yep. Yep.
He was born and raised Greenville, and there's even a
Okay.
museum for him in Greenville.
Yep.
And I recall the book report that I did on him was a biography, and I believe that he grew up in a Scottdale type place in Greenville, where he was around the cotton mills and everything, and they had the baseball teams for different mill. I'm sure yours did too.
Sure
You know,
did.
but
Sure did.
that's how Shoeless Joe Jackson came to be a predominant baseball player.
Yeah, I mean, and my dad remembers that. So the
Hmm.
in the Mill Village, across the street from my grandparents' house, is a big ball field, and um and that's where the Scottdale Mill team played their home games.
Wow.
And they'd have some, back then they had these traveling exhibition teams that would come through town that were
Hmm.
professionals, and they would play the hometown, the Mill team. And um
Any idea of any like players went on to play minor league ball or anything out of that?
Not a
Yeah.
clue. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where, everybody's got their little hometown hero, but they might have their own little hometown hero. But I mean, at least for Scottdale, probably the biggest news out of Scottdale was when my dad was in high school. They won the state championship in football. And I think during my dad's entire high school career, I think they lost one football game. My dad had
Wow.
nothing to do with that. He didn't play on the team,
Yeah.
but two of his very close buddies that he grew up with were the quarterback and the center for the football team. And she said, and he said those guys they just ran the field on everybody. They had just and the coach, Coach Maddox, I think was his name.
Mhm.
Um, Legendary coach in DeKalb County this is back, oh boy.
60s.
Yeah, I think my dad was class of 64, 66, I think.
Okay.
That sounds right to me. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay.
anyway,
You know that
but yeah,
that
anyway,
I'm going to lead into more of your story too, but what
I, I could talk about all that stuff
yeah,
forever. I love the history of
we should dig
all
more
that.
into that later because that's interesting to me. The thing I was going to ask you though about it is, do you, because I know Jason, and I only have a small sample of your dad and Jason. I know both your dad and Jason. I knew them well. God rest their souls. They both passed on. Um, and they were both intellectuals to me. They were both smart men. They did not come across as backwoods rednecks from Scottsdale. What do you think brought that on?
It's funny you mentioned because I was actually gonna to bring this up was our both of our dads, Jason and I, um, they made, I guess, what they now call the classic blue collar to white collar shift. It happened from my granddad's generation to my dad, just like it did with Jason and his dad. So his granddad was, blue collar worker. His dad, you know, went for education, got a greater level of education to be more specialized, and ended up doing, accounting and things like that. What we would call like a white collar job now. My dad was the same way, and actually, it was my grandfather that pushed both my dad and my uncle
Hmm.
and my aunt for that matter, but especially my dad and my uncle. He told them, "There's no way you're working in a mill for the rest of your life."
Hmm.
He's like, it's provided for us, but my grandfather wanted them, as he would tell them, he wanted them to do better. He just, you know, he wanted, and I think that was the desire for a lot of that generation, was to see their kids do something more than they had. Um, which is really interesting now, because I think we're starting to see a little tiny bit of a pendulum swing back to, hey, we've kind of neglected a lot of those skilled. I mean, now granted, my grandfather was a factory worker. Now granted, he did work himself up to a supervisor position. So,
Hmm.
he did work hard, and not to say, regular line workers are not hard workers. But he worked himself up to a higher level as a
Right.
supervisor. Um, that was in particular in the factory work. But I think we are starting to see a little bit of a swing back to trades. But yeah, Dad was in the first class at DeKalb College. It was a brand new thing. He
Hmm.
was the first class there. Flunked out his first semester because he played too much ping pong at the student center. Uh, so uh, transferred to DeKalb Tech. Um, oh no, wait, did he get drafted? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Somewhere there, got drafted for Vietnam.
Hmm.
Uh, and then came back and finished up at DeKalb Tech in programming. I mean, in programming, as you know from back then, that was a new thing. It was,
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody's watched Hidden Figures about NASA, the punch cards and the massive mainframe computers, that my dad was in that,
Wow.
in
Yeah,
that
that's
realm
crazy.
when he got in.
That's crazy that he would be that for. I mean, you and I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I didn't even think about getting into computers in say 1990. To me, that's way ahead of their time to
Yeah,
think about that. My father-in-law worked in computers, same
yeah,
similar age.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and because Dad was into computers, we had an old oh gosh, what was the name of that computer? And it was just an old, like,
Not a Xerox one.
no, I don't think it was
They
Xerox.
had computers for a while.
Well, I cannot remember. I mean,
The old
it was the
IBMs.
typical, yeah, it was the typical black screen with the green,
Mhm.
uh, letters and symbols on it.
Not
We
the
had an
Mac,
old
not the first Macintosh.
yeah, we had a dot matrix printer,
Yeah.
like yeah, all because my dad loved all that stuff,
Hmm.
Um,
Well, that
so yeah,
makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the computer geeks are really mechanics in their, in their person. They're people that
yeah,
like to fix
yeah,
things.
like mechanics with clean hands.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's all a mechanic is just somebody that they're like a doctor or somebody that, in a way, that just works on something to fix it.
I mean,
Um,
really, I mean, they very
Less
much.
liability with mechanic, but
Well, yeah, but I mean, still, like the idea behind programming and building or fixing a car is very similar in terms of it's very logical. Like you follow a system of questions and answers to figure out what information you want or what you're trying to fix.
yeah.
That for my dad, debugging a program was his favorite thing to do. I mean, he enjoyed writing programs, but he loved to debug. Run it,
Hmm.
see if it breaks. And if it breaks, why did it break? Let's go find out. I mean,
Ah,
stacks of dot matrix printer on his desk that they would just look through what we would call code now, but look through the program line by line, looking for, okay, it's giving me an infinite loop. I've got to find where it is,
wow. Did you ever
know.
ask him? Because he retired. Did he retire in the early 2000s or before that?
Yeah, early 2000s. Yeah.
Okay. Did you? So if he was still working in '04, that's when things were way past the microprocessor and all that kind of stuff. Did you ever ask him to like compare like how much different it was to him? Like it's just beyond like I mean, because that's a good adaptation from 1970s punch cards to 1990 or 2000, microchips and code.
Yeah, it really was. And I would hear, updates from him. He worked at DeKalb County School System. That's where he retired from. He worked 28, 30 years there.
Hmm.
And in their, I guess, computer office, that they called it Dispatch. I can't remember what Dispatch stands for, but anyway, it was essentially they were the guys writing all the programs to run all of the DeKalb County schools, whether it was they had the student side and the business side, um, or I guess the I guess student side and staff side, I guess, of programming. So he dealt more on the staff side. So a big part of his job was running payroll. So over the years, it went from this massive mainframe room that when I go into the office, there was a ramp that went up to this room. And the reason it was a ramp was that room was built up so that they could circulate air underneath all those mainframes. And that room was cold all the
Yeah.
time.
Hmm.
So it was probably that room. If I could guess a number, I'd probably say a 2 to 3,000 square foot room at least, and just tape drive
Wow.
after tape drive after tape drive. And you walk in, and they had at least two full-time guys just running back and forth, running tape all the time. So they had big tape room, storage of tape, and then I go to Dad's office, and when he first started, they were all hooked to the mainframe. So
Wow.
all those computers, it was just a console. It wasn't a desktop like we know today. Um, Boy, when they moved to desktops, boy, what a big move that was. And like it was a big transition for them
I
to go
bet.
from a simple console to that console fully relied on that mainframe to run. And then they went to desktop, and it was funny to hear them talk about it. And then Y2K came along, and everybody thought everything was going to shut down. You probably remember this. And
Hmm.
I remember my dad going, "It's not, it's just a bunch of overblown, people talking crazy." He said, all we programmers have to do is go in and allow for a different number in the first, in the first spot for the year. That's all." He said, at least that was how Dad explained it to me. He dumbed it down for me. He said, if all we have to do is just go into all the programs and allow for there to be a 2 in that spot instead of a 1, he said we can move forward.
Yeah.
So that was his way of dumbing it down for his son at the time, who was 17, 18. And he's like, yeah, it will be fine. He said everything's going to run just fine on January 1st, 2000.
Man, we'll have to maybe if I get you back on, we'll have to talk more about his story and things that he did. Well, okay, so back to you. You went to college, um, and you went a different direction in your
Yeah,
career, right?
sure did. So I early on, I loved art. And as I got older, I had started to figure out how am I going to make money being an artist, because
Yeah.
that's not a whole lot of options, at least at the time. And I had a high school art teacher at Clarkston, Miss Kaplan. Uh, gosh, what a huge impact she had. So she said there's this thing called commercial art. At least that's what she called it at the time, which is what we now know as graphic design, which is essentially taking the ideas of what makes art look nice and effective and beautiful, take that to a very practical level. Uh, what does a book look like? What does a magazine look like? What does a poster information? How does information look in a book, or anything for that matter? She's like, it's legit. Like, people need artists to make things look nice. I was like, I like that. Let's
Right.
do that. And so, yeah, so that's talked to mom and dad, and they're like, yeah, let's go for it. So yeah,
Well,
went
that's
off,
cool.
got a 4-year degree, um, came home and made peanuts for the first, 3 years, uh, doing two local magazines focused on sports, like participatory, non-professional, like running, essentially, like 5Ks, 10Ks, stuff like that.
Hmm.
Worked for that company for 3 years. Um, had the first and best boss I've ever had. Um, that was a great experience. Learned a lot from that first boss. Still friends with her today, Joanne Carroll. She's awesome. Um, got to know, anyway, fantastic. So 3 years there. Was looking for something different. Got a connection, told me, hey, this other publishing company is looking for an art director. Went and applied, and for some reason they thought I'd be a good choice. So went over there and uh, bumped my salary up by like $8,000 in one fell swoop, which doesn't sound like a lot to probably some people these days, but man, at the time I was like, woo woo, rolling in the dough.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I went to work there in Alpharetta, and was art director art director for 2 magazines there. Well, ended up being multiple, more than that, but one was a family magazine focused on sports, sporting kid magazine. It was a national magazine. And then the other was a sports, it's called Sports Edge. Doesn't
Hmm.
Neither one exist anymore, I don't think. But Sports Edge was a industry magazine for the sports manufacturing industry, which was pretty cool. I got some kind of pretty cool free swag working for that company for that year. And then a year later, my first boss, Joanne, said, hey, I need a graphic designer at the new company I'm working at. And I was like, I jumped at the chance to go work for her again. And but this time got to be a graphic designer for a couple of magazines under her, and then got to be an art director for one of the other magazines there, still under her guidance, but I got to have the title art director,
Right.
um, for a meeting planning magazine. Anyway, so magazines. And then about to get married, and knew that graphic design wise, there was nothing available up toward where I was going to be living, northeast of Atlanta. And a lot of prayer, things like that. And we decided to jump into teaching. And I almost got a minor in teaching when I was in college. Decided not to, because it was going to cost me an extra semester. And so there I went. I left, let's see, 2 months, 3 months,
Became a
3 months,
math
I think.
teacher.
Yeah,
Yeah.
3 months before I got married, I left a full-time job and was substitute teaching when we got married.
Nice. Oh, that wasn't a
And
pay cut, was it?
yeah, well, and doing freelance from my former employer,
Uh,
my former boss. So, and jumped into that and taught math, science, and social studies in the middle school, seventh and eighth grade for the next 14 years.
did
So,
you really do that for 14 years? Wow. I didn't realize
yeah,
that.
well,
I knew that you were a teacher, but I didn't know how long.
yeah, 13 in Gwinnett County, and then the last year was at Hebron Christian Academy over in Dekalb.
Okay,
So,
man. Well, we're going to get maybe next. You want to come back on?
yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
man. It's
We're
been
going
a
to come back
blast.
on and chat more, but we only got about 4 minutes or so left here. What I want to talk about is um, you left that, right?
Yeah.
You left this teaching field. So let's talk about what you're doing now because I know you're trying to get it out there on social media, and I'm going to leave some links and stuff for you. Tell me what you're doing now and how it's going.
So I went back to graphic design. A dream I'd always had to have my own design business. So I do that. Um, a buddy of mine came and said, I need you to do some design work for me for his plumbing company. I did that. He said, oh, and by the way, I've got something else we're working on, and wanted me to partner with him and another partner. And so that's been almost a year ago. And as of last week, it's coming to fruition. So we have started a trade school. Um,
Which is very cool to me.
my the two partners, one's a master plumber and has been a plumber for years. The other has worked in plumbing for years and now and runs a plumbing distribution warehouse. So they have a lot of experience and knowledge in the field. They needed an education guy to help them pull off the education part. So they brought me on, and they were like, well, kind of a double whammy. I could provide, education, the education side, plus design and marketing and website and all that kind of stuff. So that's wearing 2 or 3 different hats there. And
Mm.
like just we had another session tonight, our second week with our apprentices, and it's cool. I'm learning plumbing, which is
Yeah.
awesome. It's so cool. So I know people are like, huh? It I've learned so much in such a short amount of time about not just plumbing, but the trades, the skilled trades. Holy cow,
Right.
man. There's just so much opportunity out there. And so that's what we're hoping to do is help young people, especially,
Hmm.
know what opportunities are out there. And so there you go. There's the design part, the that, and then I got another part-time gig at at another kind of cool niche, a company down in Lithonia. They do the print. My brain is shot. I'll say it really quickly. The printing plates. Why I couldn't think of that, I
I
don't
know what
know.
those are. Okay.
Yeah, I was good. Okay, this kind of gets on your wheelhouse just a little bit. They do the printing plates and the die cuts for for the corrugated box industry.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
They're one of like 5 companies, I think, that do it in the state of Georgia,
Oh wow.
and they're extremely good at it. These folks know their craft. Again, another set of skilled tradesmen, really, that has opened my eyes. I'm like, if you order anything, Amazon, anything that comes in a corrugated box, there is a massive industry
Hmm.
that is behind it, and it's
Okay.
amazing what I've learned so far. So
Well, all right. Well, we need to round it out. I need to round it out because I got to go. We both have kids, and I got to put them in bed and whatnot.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
already in bed, but I got other things to do. Anyway,
I hear you.
Keith, I appreciate you coming on. I think maybe next episode when I have you on, we'll get a little bit more into your bio, your career, and things you've done, and we'll dedicate that one to your new school and talk more in depth about it. If you want to do that,
Absolutely, I'd love to.
maybe
Listen, anytime I get a chance to do that, I will.
and you're welcome to the Talk of the Now family. We're kind of a growing family here.
Absolutely, I need to come on with you and Jason. I'd love to do that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Maybe Jason could pick your brain too. While we're at it. So all right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Keith, thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to y'all later.
Thank you so much, Gene. Have a good one.
All right.